mic, Rick. Rick, Michael, are you guys there?
The two most common reasons people go to see
Welcome, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Elizabeth Landau, Director of Public Affairs at AGU, and I'll be your moderator for this event. This session is for anyone who's interested in getting involved in science policy or who's already involved and thinking about what new opportunities they can pursue. I'm going to open the session by giving a broad overview of some types of opportunities that scientists can take to get involved in science policy. Then we will have a panel with a wide variety of experience in science policy who are going to share their stories to inform and inspire you. The last half of the session will be open discussion, and the panel will be able to answer your questions. So please type them into the questions box throughout the session, and we'll include them in the discussion. There are a lot of ways to engage in science policy that you can fit into just a few free minutes in a day. Social media and online opportunities are a great world of options. Just about every society or organization that you belong to or follow has a way for you to engage online. These systems make it really simple, providing contact information, pre-written letters, petitions, or call scripts that make it fast and easy for you to take action to support science in policymaking. If you want to sign up for AGU's online system, just text AGU to 52886 right now, and you will get a link to sign up for our monthly science policy alerts. So a great way to start out and get engaged. If you want to get more involved, there are lots of ways to take your engagement to the next level. There may already be a science policy group on campus that you can join, or you could start a program. Or you can co-host a monthly science policy seminar for your department with your colleagues. Elections happen every year, and they're a great way to get involved. You can help encourage scientists to vote and support candidates who are proponents of science. AGU and other organizations also offer lots of ways to get involved, like webinars on how to write op-eds and setting up events where you can meet with your policymakers virtually. So check out the societies you belong to for more ideas. They may have more opportunities than you realized. If you know that you want to work in science policy full-time, or at least frequently while you do your day job, there are lots of options for internships, fellowships, and other positions that allow you to get additional experience, support, and knowledge in science policy work. And of course, you can always run for office yourself. We'd love to have more scientists as policymakers. Our panelists will have many more examples of types of opportunities that you can take to get more involved in science policy. One last note, if this topic is of interest to you, be sure to attend our virtual advocacy workshop, which is being held Friday, December 11th at 11 a.m. Eastern or 8 a.m. Pacific time. We will share a lot more detail about each of these opportunities that I've described. We'll also provide additional opportunities, and we'll have tips for how to get more involved. Today, we're fortunate to have insightful, experienced panelists who will share a wide variety of ways to engage in science policy from our range of backgrounds and interests. Maggie Walser, a senior program officer at the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine, will speak about her time as a Congressional Science Fellow, opportunities at the academies, and also about ways to get involved in AGU's Science and Society section, where she has served as leadership. Emma Burkett, a PhD student in the Natural Resources and Earth System Science Department at the University of New Hampshire, will share what it was like participating in her first AGU Virtual Advocacy Days event earlier this year. Abigail Seadler, a senior science communicator for NASA Earth Science Research and Analysis, will share how she got into the world of science policy with internship opportunities and her resulting career in science policy and communication. Chloe Hill, EGU Policy Officer at the European Geosciences Union Executive Office, will discuss opportunities for policy engagement in the European Union. So thank you all to our panelists for being here today. And with that, Maggie, I will hand it over to you to begin the panel presentations.
So hello, and thank you to Liz for including me in this panel. I'll be wearing 3 hats today. First, as a former Congressional Science Fellow. Second, as a staff person at the U.S. National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine. And then finally, as the president of AGU's Science and Society section. So the first thing I'd like to talk about today is my experience as a Congressional Science Fellow. I was the AGU Fellow in 2008 and 2009, and I worked with the Senate Committee on Energy and Natural Resources, and I can say without a doubt that this fellowship launched my career in science policy in Washington, D.C. While I was on the Hill, I worked on energy issues related to water resources, including the water demands of traditional and renewable energy, produced water issues, and desalination. More recent fellows have had portfolios including many energy and environment issues, such as climate, oceans, plastic pollution, management of natural resources and public lands, and reform of the Toxic Substances Control Act. So I'd be happy to answer any specific questions about my fellowship experience during the Q&A, but for now, I will just tell you briefly about how to get involved. So to be a Congressional Science Fellow through AGU, you do need to be a US citizen or permanent resident and an AGU member, but that's about the only hard and fast eligibility requirement. So while many fellows hold a PhD, there are no restrictions on education level or degree, age or career stage, or specific scientific background. So the next cycle of fellowships will begin in September 2021, and this year's application deadline is the 15th of January. So after my Congressional Science Fellowship, I moved to the National Academies, where I've been ever since. So at the National Academies, we serve as scientific advisors to the nation by producing authoritative reports that provide independent, objective, and nonpartisan scientific and technical advice, and through holding hundreds of convening activities every year. So over 6,000 volunteers work on our consensus reports every year. So obviously we're always looking for ways to grow our pool of experts who are interested in the science policy interface. So today I'm going to highlight ways for both early and mid to later career members to get involved with our work. So within the academies, I work in the Division on Earth and Life Studies, which is divided into 11 program units. So on the slide, I've listed the program units and issue areas that I think are most relevant to the AGU members. So for early career scientists in the audience, you might want to check out the Academy's Policy Fellowship Program. So this is like a mini version of the Congressional Science Fellowship I spoke about on the last slide. Graduate students and anyone who is within 5 years of their terminal degree can apply, and you come and you work with a staff person like me within the academies for 12 weeks, and that's usually in the winter from mid-January to mid-April, but it's been pushed back a little bit in 2021. So for those of you who are more established in your careers, I'd welcome you to follow the work of the program units that are most relevant to your expertise and interests. Then you can get on their mailing lists and watch for events including workshops or calls for committee nominations, etc. We always welcome self-nominations for committee service. And if that's something of interest, I'm happy to talk offline about your particular expertise and circumstances and direct you to the right unit within the academies to pay attention to. So another role of the National Academies is that we serve as the national adhering organization for a number of international scientific organizations. The U.S. national committees likely to be of interest to the AGU audience are those related to geology, geodesy, oceans, Arctic and Antarctic science, oils, and solar physics. So again, if you're interested in learning any more about these international bodies, you can reach out to me offline and I'll put you in touch with the appropriate colleague. So before I move on to my role as the president of the Science and Society section, I do want to take a moment to highlight a recent Academies report that was released earlier this year. So Earth and Time, which provides a vision for the next decade of Earth science funded by NSF. So this is just one example of the hundreds of reports we release every year. So that report identified these 12 science priority questions along with recommendations for facilities and infrastructure and new initiatives. So this is just a little teaser, but if you want to learn more, I can tell you that the study director and a couple of the committee members will be holding a town hall on Tuesday, December 8th from 1:30 to 2:30 p.m. Pacific time. And then finally, if you're not already affiliated with the Science and Society section as part of your AGU membership, you should be if you're interested in the science policy interface. So this section was formerly the Societal Impacts and Policy Sciences, or SIPS section. You may have heard of that, but we've recently completed a multi-year effort to transform and expand the section's mission from a more narrow focus on science policy to a broader focus with 5 defined tracks, which are art and science, community and citizen science, social and behavioral sciences, science communication, and science policy. So as we embark on this next era of our section, we're looking for more volunteers to help us develop and grow out each of those 5 tracks, as well as subcommittees focused on student and early career support, diversity, equity, inclusion, fall meeting planning, and developing a new award focused on people who are working at the Science Society interface. So another plug for a session at fall meeting, our business meeting, which anyone can attend, no need to be pre-registered, will be Wednesday, December 2nd from 2 to 3 p.m. Pacific time. So we'll have time for questions and discussion after the panel, but I included my email address here for anybody who's interested in learning more about how to get involved with National Academies work, or particularly if you would like to contribute to the Science and Society section. Thanks.
Hi, so thank you, Liz, as well for having me on this panel. My name is Emma. I'm a PhD student at the University of New Hampshire. My background is in volcanology and studying magma dynamics in volcanoes in Alaska. And I participated the second week in October in AGU's Climate Virtual Advocacy Days, where we met with congressmen, learned how to write an op-ed, and other things related to science policy. This was my first time into the world of science policy for myself, and it was awesome that AGU provided a lot of resources the week before of training us how to communicate with legislators, what kind of policies were on the floor and were important at the time, and then just a bunch of different resources for learning what's important to your state and nationally as well. So even though I'm in New Hampshire, I'm originally from Idaho, and that's where I vote as well. So I met with Idaho senators. Bruce Finney at Idaho State University joined me with these meetings with the senators. And the main things we talked about were pretty specific to Idaho. We try to really hone in on the problems that Idaho is going to face with climate change regarding water resources and the reduction in the snowpack over time. But we also wanted to provide some solutions for Idaho moving forward. So with my background in volcanology, I really focused on the geothermal energy for Idaho and advancing those, the technology relevant to geothermal energy to make it more sustainable energy resource for Idaho. And we really tried to play up how much money and jobs this could bring to the state specifically, and how it's important to the conservative platform as well. So why I wanted to join with the virtual advocacy days is I really liked the idea that it was all virtual. It made it really easy to jump into, because knowing that I didn't have to actually meet these people in person as a first timer with policy, it was really comforting to know I could just call them over Zoom or over the phone and had all these resources virtually as well. And even though my background isn't really in climate science, it's still something that's really important to my family, being farmers and ranchers in Idaho, and that's a big concern for Idaho constituents. So I really wanted to, I guess, give scientists a voice with really conservative senators representing our state and showing that it's important. And one of the things that I really learned from this event is that it's important for scientists to meet with conservative legislators, even though it's kind of a little bit intimidating at first, because they don't maybe not necessarily get to hear the science part as much because it's intimidating to meet with them as an environmental science. So it was fun to meet with them. They were really nice. And I actually met with the staffers, not the senators themselves, but they were really friendly. And we connected on some policies, and I followed up with them a little bit afterwards. And they were pretty excited about the geothermal stuff as well. Would I recommend doing it again? So I think I would recommend doing it for other people to get involved, especially if it's virtual again, because we don't know how long COVID's going to last. But that really made it easy, and I really would recommend doing it with AGU and some kind of event that AGU hosts, because of so many resources they provided. It made it really easy, and office hours with people to kind of coach you and work through your pitch before you met with them, and to look over your one pager that you were going to leave with the staffers as well. So that made it much smoother than I think it would have gone if I just met with them by myself.
Thank you for having me, Liz, and hello, everyone. My name is Abby Seadler, and I am the Senior Science Communicator for Earth Science Research at NASA. I'm going to tell you a little bit about my experience getting into science policy today. So while I currently work in science communication, I am the former geoscience policy manager for the American Geosciences Institute, and I'm also a former AGU science policy intern. Liz here is actually my former boss and the first person to show me the ropes. I'll never forget one of the first tasks that she gave me, which at the time felt like being thrown into the deep end, but ultimately was incredibly formative as far as getting my feet wet and exposing me to what the daily grind of science policy work really entails. So simply put, I had to call every Democratic member of the House Appropriations Committee to talk about plutonium-238, and I was absolutely terrified. I hope I don't get this wrong in front of Liz, but if I remember correctly, I had to inform the members that plutonium-238 was a non-weapons grade form of plutonium, and that it was, in fact, a critical resource for deep space exploration platforms that couldn't use solar panels as an energy source. And I had to say that like 30 times. After the 8th or 9th call, I learned that more often than not, it's usually another intern on the other end of that line, and that there's absolutely nothing to be afraid of when it comes to reaching out to your representatives. After all, that's what they're there for. So, but it was only through that first experience, making all those calls and that internship overall and Liz's expert guidance, that I began to unravel the ins and outs of the policy process, and the whole thing became sort of demystified to me. And I've learned and continue to learn that real policy change, sustainable long-term change, is mostly slow. It's about the grind, about making those calls, those 30 calls or 100 calls, and moving the needle. It's about how engaging with policy and decision makers involves being polite yet persistent. And it's about repetition and rallying your community to get on the same page. It's about clear communication and meeting people where they are so that issues that are important to you and your community are also seem important to them and their communities. And so that strong foundation that I got through that internship at AGU, it really set the foundation for me for the success when I was finally able to land a full-time position doing science policy work with the American Geosciences Institute, and it continues to underpin my work today at NASA. So today, while I'm not directly involved in science policy now, I'm constantly harkening back to those lessons that I learned to better identify and craft messaging that resonates with our internal and external stakeholders, that highlights the value of NASA's earth science research. To me, earth science and policy have always been inherently linked. The practicality of the geosciences and how they relate to our everyday lives is what drew me to earth science in the first place. That and smashing rocks in my mineralogy class. But really, even though I grew up in the desert in Arizona, surrounded by rocks, it wasn't until college that I started to understand and really dive into this connection through my coursework and through a number of internships and ultimately later professional experiences that I was fortunate enough to get. I initially floundered when I got to college. I thought I wanted to be a creative writing major. And it wasn't until my sophomore year that I finally realized that I was much more drawn to the earth science and government classes. And so I wound up double majoring. To me, geoscience and government teach you about how the world works. One in terms of natural processes and science, and the other in terms of human constructs and the protocols that we put in place for ourselves for effective self-government, hopefully. I've worked ever since to find all the ways that these skill sets can intersect and can be combined. This has included stints doing straight up research as an intern in the Mineral Sciences Department at the Smithsonian National Museum of Natural History, where I studied the trace element chemistry of lepidolites and pegmatites, to experiencing the industry side of things as an intern at Freeport-McMoRan in copper and gold, where I helped benchmark and implement best practices in sustainable development. And since then, I've oscillated between science communication and science policy with positions at AGU, AGI, and now NASA. Throughout all of these experiences, I've tried to retain and transfer all the skills that I've picked up and learned along the way, and I'm still learning. So how can you get involved? I recommend finding out what issues you're passionate about, reaching out to your representatives. Don't be afraid, and getting involved in things like the internship experiences that I mentioned before, and congressional visits days, virtual or in person, like how Emma suggested, which AGU helps to coordinate. I look forward to answering your questions and hopefully helping to demystify this process for you as it was for me, so that you too can get involved in these incredibly important times. Thank you.
Okay, so welcome everyone who has joined us here today from all over the world. My name is Chloe Hill and I am the Policy Officer for the European Geosciences Union. And today I'm going to be presenting just a couple of opportunities that exist for scientists to engage in policy in Europe. To do this, I am going to share my screen with you. Okay, so as I said, I'm going to be presenting some opportunities that exist for scientists to engage in European policy. Before I do get started, I'm just going to give you a very brief overview of who I am, who the EGU are, so that you can understand the context in which I'm approaching these opportunities. So I'm sure some of you who are in the session today have heard of the European Geosciences Union before. We do share a lot of similarities with the AGU in that we are a membership-based organisation that supports geoscientists. We currently have about 20,000 members from all around the world, but predominantly in Europe. And we support these researchers through different activities, through information, through committees, through awards, all of these types of things. And we also have an annual General Assembly, which is happening in April next year, so April 2021, and it will be online this year. So it'll be the second time that we've moved the event online. You are more than welcome to join. And if you'd like any more information about that, it is all on the EGU website. So as the policy officer, I am going to be focusing today on the opportunities that exist for scientists to connect with policymakers and the types of activities that the EGU runs to help scientists do this. Now, today is going to be a very short presentation, so I don't have time to go into a lot of different opportunities. I'm just going to be focusing on two. So the first one will be the Science Policy Pairing Scheme that the EGU runs in collaboration with the European Parliament. And the second one will focus on an opportunity that the European Commission offers both scientists and citizens. The other things on this list you can actually find at the website down the bottom, so just egu.eu/policy. You'll find a lot of the information that I'll be talking about on there today. Okay, so before we do jump straight into this, I am going to give a very, very brief overview of European policy and the different institutions that exist. If you've never interacted with European policy before, it can seem a little bit overwhelming. And do keep in mind, there is a lot of information out there on the internet. There are some really informative videos, but this will just give you an overview of the institutions that I most commonly work with. So at the top there, you can see at the top right-hand side, you can see a map of the EU. It involves a lot of countries. It involves 27 member states. So these are countries that exist within the EU. Now, the three institutions I will be mentioning today is the European Commission, the European Parliament, and the Council of the European Union. Now, the European Commission is the institution that proposes and drafts all new legislation. So they are the people who really come up with the legislation, and they do use scientific expertise to do this as well. So I'll be talking about an opportunity that exists for scientists to help to engage in this process towards the end of my presentation today. The second institution is the European Parliament, and this is made up of members of the European Parliament, or MEPs, and of course their assistants as well. They couldn't get anything done without their assistants, so that's really important to keep in mind. And the third institution is the Council of the European Union. Now, the European Parliament and the Council of the European Union have joint legislative powers. So once the European Commission proposes a new legislation, it is up to the European Parliament and the Council of the European Union to decide whether this legislation should be passed, how it should be amended, or whether it should be rejected. And there's a long process for them to do this that I'm not going to go into during this particular presentation, but I will be going into it a little bit in my next presentation, which will be in the Science and Society Policy, Science Policy 1. So if you do want to hear a little bit more about these institutions and how scientists can interact with them, please feel free to join that presentation. Okay, and now on to the EGU's Science Policy Pairing Scheme with the European Parliament. So that is one of the institutions we talked about on the previous slide. Now we do this particular activity for a couple of different reasons. Firstly, it helps promote a culture of evidence-informed policymaking, which is really important, not just for scientists, but for society in general. It provides the scientists involved with a really fantastic experience inside the Parliament, which is one of the key policymaking bodies of the European Union. And it also gives the MEP, the member of the European Parliament, and her assistants the opportunity to get some expertise, some scientific information from the scientists involved. To do this, we first pick an MEP that we think would be interested. We then invite them to participate, and then we put the call out for scientists. We in the office, the EGU office and the EU executive, we shortlist the scientists and send the shortlist to the MEP and their assistants to decide on which scientists they think would best fit the role, and based on the expertise that they need at the time of the pairing. So if this is something that you would like to be involved with, we do at least one pairing every year. The selected candidate, the selected scientist, does get to go to Brussels for an entire week, and Brussels is sort of the hub for EU policymaking, and they get to go inside the Parliament and work with an MEP and their assistants during this week. So during the 2019 pairing scheme, Solmaz was a selected scientist, and she was paired with MEP Mia-Petra Kumplanatri, who was a Finnish MEP. During her time in the Parliament, Solmaz actually did a lot of different things. She recorded a Q&A about climate change, which was later showed on Finnish television. She briefed the MEP and her team about the potential threats to the Baltic Sea, and she participated in a number of different meetings and events. So if you are interested, I can recommend that you keep an eye on our website for those details. You can also sign up to something called the Database of Expertise, and this will just enable you to get notifications when opportunities like this arise, so basically an email from me. Okay, so the second opportunity I'm going to talk to you about today is the European Commission consultations. So the European Commission is one of the other institutions I talked about a couple of slides ago. This is the institution that drafts and proposes legislation. So the consultations are basically the start of the legislation process. The Commission has an idea about what they think is important, and they would like to gather more information, more expertise, and more opinions about that particular either the process or issue. And so they open up this consultation period. Usually it's for between 3 and 6 months. And this allows anyone to give their opinion and to attach any information they think is relevant. Now, this information is all looked at and all sorted through by Commission employees. So if you do answer a consultation, it will definitely be looked at. Some consultations specifically ask for scientific expertise in a particular area or ask a particular industry to respond. Consultations are usually in the form of questionnaires, so it's a relatively short questionnaire, but there's always an opportunity for you to attach more information. For example, you might have created a one-page summary of your research you think is really important that you can attach and then potentially link to your research. Why might you be interested in participating in these consultations? There are a couple of really good reasons. Firstly, it is probably one of the easiest ways that you can contribute to the EU policymaking process. It is also a good way of understanding how your research can actually be relevant for policy. So especially if you're new at science or policy or policymaking in general, and you're not quite sure how your research could be relevant for policy, this can be a really good way to dip your toe in. It might also provide inspiration for future research. If you do decide to publish like your opinion about something or your research publicly, it could potentially allow you to find others who are working in the same area, and then, you know, leave room for collaborations and things like that. So if you are interested in having a look at these consultations, the website is just down below. You can also just Google EU consultations and they will come up. And that is it from me today. So if you have any questions at all, You can get in touch with me on Twitter. My handle is just at the top. My email is not on here, but it's just policy@egu.eu there. Thank you so much for watching, and please feel free to ask any questions during the discussion.
Great, thank you so much to all of our panelists. I really appreciate the great overview that you were able to give on the many opportunities in science policy. There are obviously even more than that, and we hope to cover a lot of them during our discussion. If you'd like more information on any of these opportunities, we have more information on our website at sciencepolicy.agu.org, or you can email us directly at sciencepolicy@agu.org if you have additional questions. And now we're going to move on to the panel discussion, so please continue to type your questions into the Q&A box throughout the discussion. So for our panelists, I'd like to start out by asking, particularly for Abby, Maggie, and Chloe, there are some opportunities like the Congressional Science Fellowships that are very well known in science policy and get lots of attention. But there are very few positions for those types of opportunities, and there are so many other ways to get involved. What opportunities to get involved in science policy do you think people overlook?
Well, I can go first. My name was alphabetically superior. So I would recommend potentially getting involved in different writing clubs. If you're a student still in college, maybe getting involved in your student newspaper. Right now, I've heard there are some really cool share your science, like stand-up comedy club things as well that you can get involved in, because really something that's so important in science policy is being able to communicate your science clearly. And these are some maybe non-traditional ways that you might not think about to hone your science message and to get involved.
Chloe, did you have?
Yeah, I can jump in there, sure. So actually mine's a bit related to that. So obviously I mentioned the consultations during my particular presentation. And if you were in Europe, that's a fantastic way of getting involved. Really easy, really straightforward. You can also learn a lot just from reading what sort of questions are being asked. Another thing, now that we're all in isolation, a lot of policy events have actually moved online. So these are always, in Europe, they're almost always free to attend. They're still free to attend now. And if you find one that's interesting, if you just Google, policy events, we have a list of different policy events on the EGU website, so the European Geosciences website, of science policy events that might be interesting for geoscientists there. Just attend some, go along, see who's speaking, see what's interesting for you. It's a particularly good way of actually getting introduced to some new topics and seeing where your research is really relevant. There's also a couple of different events where you can participate. So there's different meet and greets, various happy hours as well. So you can actually meet other people who might be working at the science policy interface, who are interested in policy or who are actually policymakers themselves. So the EGU, we actually have a happy hour coming up on the 17th of December. And there'll be a few policymakers coming to this, a lot of scientists. You can jump on and have sort of an informal chat in some breakout rooms about some issues that are relevant for geoscientists, but also policymakers as well. So.
Great, and I would just like to add, so at the top of this session, Liz had some ideas for like science policy groups on your campus if you're a student. But I also want to urge you to think about the different scales at which policy happens. So obviously, like most of us have talked a lot about the national level. So here in the US, you could consider reaching out to your state legislators or even your local city council. Lots of important decisions are probably being made in your town, and especially coming from the earth sciences, we can provide valuable input to the decision makers at the local level. So don't rule out kind of that smaller level of governance in your community. And then moving beyond kind of the more formal science policy, I think some people, when they're thinking about maybe like dipping their toe outside the ivory tower, kind of mixed metaphors there. But sometimes you just think, I want someone to use my science. So you might consider looking into AGU's Thriving Earth Exchange, which pairs scientists with communities who need some sort of help on an issue that could be informed by earth science. So that's another way to make sure your science is being used, and that's kind of a more local scale way.
are all fantastic options. Thank you. We also have an attendee who suggested the FYI newsletter from AIP as a good resource for science policy event listings in the US, which I absolutely agree with. Emma, our next question is for you. What drove you to sign up for AGU Virtual Advocacy Days? Why were you motivated to sign up, and what was the experience that you were hoping to get?
Yeah, so really what motivated me is that, one, it was virtual, so the stakes were a little bit lower, at least in my head they were. And then at least in my state, climate change and climate policy, which was really the theme of the advocacy days, doesn't get a lot of positive attention where I'm from. So I really wanted to meet with representatives and legislators and just stress like how important it is in Idaho, because they probably weren't hearing a lot of that, at least from the the public side of it. And then for the experience that I wanted to get out of it, I really wanted to learn how to communicate science to legislators and to the public in general, because as a volcanologist, it's important to learn how to communicate science to people. And so and I really do feel like, especially with all of the tools that AGU gave me the week before, really helped me learn how to communicate. And I think that's one of the biggest things that I took away from the advocacy days.
Thanks, Emma. That's great. Our next question is asking about what opportunities exist for non-US citizens in science policy. And maybe Maggie, you could start by talking about non-US citizens in the US and what opportunities they have. And then maybe Chloe, you could talk a little bit about more world-focused engagement.
So I will plug again the Mirzayan Fellowship Program from the National Academies. So you need to be a US citizen or already in the US on likely a student visa, but that one is open to non-US citizens. And then I think if you go to so the Congressional Fellowship that I did was sponsored by AGU, but it's organized through the American Association for the Advancement of Science, or AAAS. And if you go to their website where there's information about the different fellowships, they used to, I think they still do, have a separate section on opportunities for non-US citizens. Again, that would be non-US citizens in the US.
Sure. So, I mean, obviously I'm going to speak to some European examples here, but I mean, all European examples are all open to EU nationals. So anyone who's from an EU member state or an EU country. And that obviously includes a lot of these traineeships as well. We have them in Europe too. There's the Blue Book traineeship that's with the European Commission. There's also something called the Joint Research Centre that has its own internship program too, or traineeship program, and they specifically actually look for scientists. Now, these are mostly for people living in the EU, but they do have some that are open to any nationality as well. These particular ones that are open for everyone, there's only a very small percentage, so they are quite competitive. But if you are looking to get more involved in science policy, I can recommend sort of looking at the Joint Research Centre or JRC, or at Blue Book traineeships. So if you type either of those into Google, they'll come up, and that can be open potentially for any nationality. So check that out.
Abby or Emma, did you have anything you want to add to that?
No, I might also just suggest looking into more international organizations like the United Nations to see if they had any potential opportunities or internships. And again, just reaching out to your local government, wherever you may be, as Maggie had suggested.
Yeah, I will mention you definitely don't need to be a US citizen in the US to reach out to your legislators or local government and to talk to them about what issues are critical to the local community. You can absolutely still do that. So our next question is about the Congressional Science Fellowship specifically, and how that will be implemented during COVID, as many people are working from home, avoiding crowds and all of that. Asking about, are there virtual opportunities? Will the fellow be expected to be in DC or on Capitol Hill? I have a little information I can share, but Maggie, do you want to start with this one?
I will actually defer to you, because you probably know what's going on with this year's fellows.
Excellent. So AGU's current Congressional Science Fellow is working remotely. She has relocated to Washington, DC. The office had requested that she do so if and when she's able to go into the office to make that very quick and easy to transition. So I have a feeling that for the next round of Congressional Science Fellows, who would start in September of 2021, they would probably want the same thing and request that even though it may be a virtual start, just depending on what the situation is with COVID then, they would like people to be able to easily transition to the office when that is an option again. So the next question that I'd like to ask the group is, what do you think is the best first step to get involved in science policy if you want a career in the field? And then alternatively, if you don't want a career in science policy and you want to keep doing your current work full time, how can you help affect change? What are some other opportunities that you can take? Abby, do you want to start with this one?
Sure, absolutely. So, sorry, can you repeat the first part of the question again?
Sure. If you want a career in science policy, which you know a lot about, what would be a great first step for that?
As I mentioned in my intro, I think what was really helpful for me to get a taste for what it's like is really signing up for an internship, applying for an internship with some of these science societies. AGU has a great internship program, but so does the American Geosciences Institute. AAAS, which Maggie mentioned, also has a science policy internship program. I'm sure there are many others now since the time when I was looking. So take a look at those and definitely apply. And the congressional visits days that Emma recommended.
Mm-hmm. So I would say any of the advice we've given so far about how to get involved. So anything Abby just said, reaching out to your local decision makers, I think would apply whether or not you want to make a career change or not. If you want to continue a career in research, but start branching out a little bit into science policy, definitely the congressional visit days that Emma talked about, virtual or eventually in person again. You can become more active in AGU. And you can, Liz gave that number at the beginning that you can text to sign up for science policy alerts from AGU. Those are definitely something you can do without a career change. Also, you can volunteer to serve on National Academies committees. We're always looking for researchers with relevant expertise to help with our large consensus study reports.
Sure. So from my end, I would say regardless of whether you want to change a career or if you're just looking to share your research with policymakers, my advice would be to get a feel for the landscape. So really think about what policy area your research is relevant to. And it might not always be so obvious. You might have to have a bit more of a think and think a bit more deeply and maybe connect some things together to really work out who wants your research, where is it most relevant, what policies are coming up or what policies have just passed that could be potentially relevant for your research. And this sort of research is also, it can be really challenging. So do feel free to reach out to people who are already working at the science policy interface and ask them, say, hey, this is what I'm working on at the moment. This is what I'm really passionate about. What area should I be looking at here? Twitter is also a really invaluable resource. If you're not on Twitter, you don't necessarily have to create an account, although it does make it easier to follow people. But work out who is working on these areas in policy. Work out which NGOs, which scientific unions, which associations are really connecting on the issues that are relevant for your research and start following them and start seeing what they're doing. You could also reach out to these organizations too and just say, look, I'm interested in this. Is there any way I can help you out or assist? Like, this is the research I'm working on right now. Could that be useful to you? Do you know anyone who it might be useful for? What would you recommend? Really don't be shy to ask people and to really try and connect on that level. I would also say, again, just attend events. They're all free at the moment. They're all online. Work out what are the key issues that are happening and also think about what level you want to work on. Do you want to work on an international level, a local level, a state level, an EU level? So think about those kind of questions as well and what you are most passionate about and what you can see yourself doing in the future. So ask yourself the hard questions, I guess.
Yeah. I will add on to what Chloe just said. So not only thinking about what scale you want to work at, but think about like, what are your strengths? Do you like public speaking, or would you rather participate by writing letters and written input? Do you like interacting with large groups, or do you like smaller scale interactions? So thinking more about your personal strengths and how you can play to those. And then also for researchers associated with a university, most universities will have a congressional and or government affairs office. So if kind of making your way in the science policy wilderness seems a little too scary, you can reach out to them and they can help you navigate that space.
Great point, Maggie. Abby, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I might also add, if you go on a congressional visits days, or if you get over the fear of contacting your local representative, and really you shouldn't be afraid to just call up your office and talk to the person who answers the phone, tell them that you're a scientist, tell them what your field is, ask them who the person in the office is who would best, who would be best to be connected with. And then you can strike up a relationship with that person sort of over time. What you want to do is become a trusted source for them. You don't want to spam them, but you want to sort of be there if they have a question, and keep up the relationship on a regular basis. Every month send them your latest research, but always frame it within why is it important to them and their constituents, and why are you sending it to them. Just a quick little email, and then you'll become an invaluable resource to them. Who knows what could happen? They could invite you to testify. Who knows?
That is absolutely true, Abby. Great point. Emma, our next question is for you. What surprised you about the experience of doing those virtual visits with policymakers?
I think the thing that surprised me the most was how easy it was to talk to them over the phone, and how nice they were, I guess, as well. I was expecting a little bit more pushback, and maybe, but they were we had a really good discussion. And then another thing that surprised me was when I first signed up to meet with the senators, I was the only one from Idaho. And so I was pretty scared at that point. And so I reached out to a bunch of climate scientists in Idaho, since I'm in New Hampshire here. And I had a lot of positive feedback, and like a lot of people wanted to join with me, and I had Dr. Bruce Finney join me. And it really felt like a collaboration, which was pretty awesome. And then also the things that snowballed from the meeting with the senators. We had an interview from the university journal. They wanted to spotlight the work that Professor Finney was doing. And then from that, it kind of snowballed to the local climate action groups reaching out to us and telling us what kind of policies they were excited about for Idaho specifically. So yeah, everything that I was surprised by so many people reaching out to us prior to this meeting. I was not expecting that.
Fantastic. I'm glad that there was so much that happened because you were willing to go ahead and make that effort. It's fantastic to hear. And then a question for the full panel. What's the best way to promote the results from an international science program to US funders and US policymakers? They're not looking to promote their particular interest or research, but things that are coming out of the program on behalf of the operators of that program. And I'd love to hear thoughts both in a messaging, framing context, and also in a logistical, how do you get this information to the policymakers? And maybe Maggie, you'd like to start on this one?
Yeah, I was going to actually speak to the messaging and framing. I think much like anything else we've talked about today, I think both Emma and Abby have touched upon kind of tailoring the information you want to share with decision makers based on the interests of their constituents. So for this international program, how do the results coming out of that research benefit the constituents of whoever you're talking to, whether that be a congressperson or a senator?
I would just add on that, so I work at NASA now, but I don't do policy at NASA. But at NASA, of course, all of our research is very global, and we work with tons of international partners in Europe and in Japan and all over the world, France, Finland, to create our instruments and to do our science. And so a lot of what I talk about from a communication perspective at NASA, which I think is relevant in the policy sphere, is that the science that we do is global, and that the Earth is one big global system, and what happens somewhere else will inevitably affect what happens someplace farther away. So just sort of emphasizing the interconnected system. Earth is a system of systems, and yeah, we're all sort of in this together, kind of a thing.
Yeah, I don't have a lot to add. It is really important, obviously, to sort of work out what your messaging is and what is important to the person you're communicating with. I will say in Europe, a lot of the research funding actually comes from the European Union. And the people who are involved with that are very, very interested in promoting the results of that research. So actually the policymakers themselves are interested in sharing that with other policymakers, but also with the public. The EU Commission has their own office that helps promote research that has been funded by the EU to show the public it is actually worth funding. This is where the money is going. This is where your tax dollars are going. So they're actually really happy to help assist with that, actually. And as part of any EU research funding should have some sort of outreach involved as well, some sort of communication. That is a requirement of funding these days. So if it's an EU funded project and you're not quite sure where you should be sending it to, you can always get in touch with them. If you're part of an EU research project, you should know who to contact about that. And if you're part of a collaborative EU and US funding, you can probably ask the EU component of who you should be contacting about that to help you out.
Fantastic. Thanks, Chloe. This next question is asking about how you stay positive when the public in Congress has oftentimes a distrust of scientists. Do the changes you see outweigh all the times when people reject your work? And I think maybe, Emma, if you want to start with this and kind of talk about what you did, how you framed your science, how you approached communicating in those meetings that you had recently.
Yeah, so it was intimidating meeting with the senator who had kind of spoken about that he didn't really trust climate scientists in the past, but we kind of just met them and talked like they assumed that they already were on board with us, and I think just showing them, I'd like to think that just showing them that scientists, we want to meet with them and that we're not here to like pick a fight or debate whether the sciences are real or not. We're just assuming they think it's real. And here's like how it's going to impact especially the money that's coming into the state, or how climate research can bring more money into the state, and how it can improve the safety of the state. So kind of, I guess, taking it from the debate of the science to here's how it directly impacts the state and the platforms that that specific senator is really concerned about. And that really, I think, broke down a lot of walls for us. We didn't really have a debate at all. And they were really interested in listening to us. And I think a lot of it, at least in my experience, was maybe hyped up in the news and stuff, and actually meeting with the senators, staffers, you realize that they're not as negative about climate science as it maybe seems like on the face value, and that they really did want to listen to us. And so it's just initiating that conversation with them.
Great.
Maybe, I'll just jump in here and say, in the EU at least, a lot of the time, if you're sharing your research or you're making a statement on behalf of an organisation or multiple organisations, and you're trying to really get in touch with key policymakers who are sort of putting together a policy or a legislation or changes to it, you often won't even know when your research or when your statement is being used. So don't be disheartened if they haven't gotten back to you and said, "Oh, thanks so much for this. Like, it was really useful," because they're not gonna tell you. But they may actually, use entire sentences from your statement without you knowing. So it is really hard to know whether your research or whether your statement has even been used sometimes. And it's just a matter of, either going into that policy later on and seeing word for word what you wrote, or just having hope that it's there somewhere, and that, if you put enough pressure on, you get back to them enough, you continue the relationship you have with that particular policymaker, that you will get through them.
And then I would like to just flip the question on its head. So rather than allowing yourself to be discouraged by the public distrust of science, use that to motivate yourself to get more involved. It's, especially with the state of the climate, it's more important than ever for scientists to speak up and get involved and make sure that our knowledge is used to make the best decisions. So I think just the conscious decision to use it as a motivating factor is quite helpful to me, at least.
Yeah, and I would just add on to what everybody else has said, and especially what Emma has said. In my experience, when I worked in science policy, you know, it was very rare that you would actually have sort of a confrontational meeting with somebody. Staffers and people in Congress understand that they're there to be elected representatives, and they're there to listen to their constituents. And you know, most people are reasonable and will listen to the science and will listen to you and be very cordial and friendly even. And I would also say that in building these relationships with these offices that you might find, you know, you would expect them to be confrontational, just being yourself and being honest is really important, because it's not often that they're going to remember exactly what you said, but they're going to remember how you made them feel. And so as long as you come across as yourself and you're excited to be there and sharing your science, then they're going to remember that, and they're going to have a positive association with what you were telling them and you and your issue going forward.
I think that was such a great point. It's really about building those relationships and being able to continue those going forward, because you're going to be able to make inroads when you have a good relationship that you would not be able to make otherwise. And I think that's a great point for us to end our panel on. I want to again say a huge thank you to all of you for being here, for sharing your expertise and your knowledge. This has been incredibly enlightening, and I really appreciate all of you being engaged. And I will say, for anyone who is interested in more of this, we have a lot more great events coming up for the rest of the meeting. So please do check out our other science policy events. If you'd like to get monthly science policy alerts, you can text AGU to 52886, or you can email us at sciencepolicy@agu.org. Thank you again to our panelists. Thank you to our audience for being here today. We appreciate it, and have a great fall meeting.